Okay, again, connections in nature. So adaptations are important. Organisms have characteristics that help them survive, help them reproduce, do the things they need to do. These are different adaptations, such as having thick fur. If you're an organism that lives up north, or a seal that has lots of blubber to stay warm. Um, Organisms change through time, through the evolutionary process, and it's the process of natural selection in particular that uh, causes evolution, if you will. Uh, that is, as shown over on the side here. Here, the sieve is essentially the selecting agent, if you will, in a not so natural picture. But imagine out in nature. So you've got a bunch of organisms. Some don't get through the sieve, they don't survive, but some do get through. And with um, 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 bacteria and antibiotics, if this particular type here is not affected by the quote antibiotic here, then it will get through and it'll reproduce more, and then the population can slowly change or evolve over time from having relatively few of these type to having very many of the ones that can resist the antibiotic. Okay, further connections. So producers, organisms that are able to make their own food, as we'll see, the base of the food chain, are known as producers. They can use sunlight energy to harness that energy to make organic molecules, to make sugars, and providing food for other organisms. Consumers are the organisms that consume the producers, or other consumers. They cannot make their own food. They have to get it from other organisms. Um, the producers, their activity, if you will, can be measured by what's known as the net primary production. That is the amount of energy they're able to convert into new organism, new organic matter, primarily through the process of photosynthesis. Um, and so it's essentially in a given unit of area, how much photosynthesis is going on, how much new biomass is being created by the producers. And we'll talk later about nutrient cycles, these cycles that um, um, essentially allow for the movement of materials from one part of the system to another. We'll talk, for example, about the nitrogen cycle um, and the phosphorus cycle. Those are two of the big ones we'll focus on, as well as carbon cycle and some others. Um, okay, so here's sort of the big picture look, if you will, when we talk about some of these terms. So, of course, you've got, again, producers that are able to make use of the sunlight and are able to make more of themselves, more biomass. You've got the consumers that eat the producers, or again, eat other consumers and get their energy that way. And as you can see, and this is an important point we'll want to remember, we'll stress this many times, and that is energy has a one-way trip through systems, through natural systems. And this is dictated by the laws of thermodynamics. You cannot recycle energy. You can't reuse it. It has a one-way trip. Whereas matter, or different nutrients, elements, whatever, they go through these cycles. They are reused. They're recycled. They just move from one part of the system to another. The plants will take compounds out of the soil. It becomes part of the plant. Some consumer eats it, and now that particular element, that compound, is part of that consumer. The consumer dies and decays, and that gets back into the ground, into the soil, into aquatic systems. And so the matter just recycled, reused over and over again. Energy, one-way trip. Okay, so ecologists, like other scientists, make use of the scientific method to do what they do. As we talked about with the amphibian example at the beginning, it starts with, of course, observations where you notice some particular thing happening. And from that those observations, as we talked about, of course, that leads to a question, and you develop a hypothesis. Your educated guess the answer to that question. You develop experiments, and these experiments can come in various forms. They can be in the lab type experiments where it's highly controlled, you're just manipulating a single variable and you're seeing what happens. They can be scaled up to field experiments at, again, various scales. Here you can just see they've got these stock tanks outside and they've got different treatments in there. Or they can be at a much larger scale, looking at whole watersheds, ecosystems, etc. You can also do some modeling, mathematical modeling, and we're going to do some of that this year. We're going to use Excel to do some modeling, and it's a useful way to use information, use data from studies to see what happens if you change the conditions, what kind of outcome you can get, and you can make some predictions from these models as to how the system will change if some particular variable changes. Okay. Some questions are, as it says, they're easier to answer than others. It depends on the scale and the complexity of the questions. So, for example, in book, and this is of course a big topic out there, something like, for example, global warming. This idea that the planet is warming up, which is not controversial in the sense that we know climate changes, but of course, the degree to which it's changing, and what's perhaps causing it to change, these are tough questions. And of course, we only have one planet, Earth, I should say. There are other planets, but only one planet, Earth. So we don't have another planet Earth that can be the control, and our planet Earth where we can make these changes and see what happens. So this is an issue that's very difficult to study, but it can be done, and you can attempt to get at some answers. Now, what makes for good experimental design? Well, we've already seen that, talked about that a little bit, with, of course, having a control group is always desirable. Serving as your baseline, it does not receive the treatment. And then, of course, you'll have experimental treatments that are receiving some change to their system, some variable is being modified. As is shown in this picture over here, it's nice to have replication, that is, multiple trials of each control and experimental treatment, so that you can come to some sort of average effect or average change. And in this kind of situation over here, you can see all these little plots of land that they're being manipulated. Having the treatments randomly assigned to the different plots is ideal. For example, if you just had two main things you were looking at here, or a control group and one variable that's being changed, you wouldn't just split this down the middle and have this all be your control and this all be your experimental group, because you could have the conditions being slightly different on one side than the other. So you'd want to mix it up and have control and experimental groups mixed in randomly, so that you can reduce any effects of differences across this field. Okay, so back to our initial question of the amphibians. Well, as we saw, it seems that the parasite is having an effect, but that can also be influenced by agricultural runoff, in particular pesticides, some other things that might be causing this decline in amphibians. Of course, a real simple one would be habitat loss. As you decrease the amount of wetlands, there's less space for these amphibians. It's also thought maybe an exposure to ultraviolet light might have an impact on these organisms. So again, it's a complex system, a lot of interactions going on, and as you can sort of figure, trying to get to the bottom of it is not easy, and so it takes a lot of experimentation in the lab, in the field, to try to get at what's going on. And we perhaps will never get to a definitive answer. We will never really prove what it is, but we can probably get close to figuring out what it is and have a pretty good idea and be fairly confident. Okay, there's the chapter 1 videos.